Good morning, everyone. I'm Alfonso Pallavicini. I'm the president of European Historic Houses. And I'm very happy because we are a lot of people today in the webinar. We are almost already 150. So this shows great interest to what we are talking today. Foremost, I want to thank Pernille Weiss, who is member of the European Parliament, EPP Group, Shadow Rapporteur of the Energy Efficiency Directive, to have proposed to do this webinar with us. And maybe the easiest thing is I will leave you with her. She will explain you what it's about from her side. And I will then take the word back to explain you what we do inside European Historic Houses. Pernille, the floor is yours. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Alfonso, and thank you all who is watching now and participating in this very important talk on historic houses in the green transition. Yes, I am Pernille Weiss. I'm a Dane. I once was a nurse. I come from a carpenter's family where all the males either were carpenters or architects or engineers. So working with our physical environment, with buildings and architecture is a part of my family legacy. So I'm very, very happy to be here together with a lot of other people who share the same love to our historic houses. I believe that historic houses must contribute to the green transition to the extent that it is possible while keeping their historical values. That is important because historic houses is the face and the memory of how Europe was, what Europe is, and also can give us the compass of continuing developing Europe as we want it to be for the future generations. Also, historic houses is the proof of the cultural diversity of Europe that stands out on a globe where there is a lot of totalitarianism and also sometimes one-size-fits-all solutions. We made Europe strong because of our diversity, and our historic buildings is a message on that. Thirdly, also, historic houses is the main attraction of rural Europe. We must also remember that that is why international tourism is longing to visit and revisit Europe. That is because what they can see nowhere else in the world when they visit the rural area, especially in Europe. So what kind of Europe will we have without the aesthetics and the spirit of historic houses? That is an important discussion to have right now. We are going to make EU a climate neutral continent by 2050 and reduce the emissions by at least 55% in already 2030. So in the coming European Green Deal regulation, there is two very important directives that play a key role. The one that I'm working with right now as the shadow rapporteur, namely the Energy Efficiency Directive, and then very soon also we will engage a lot in the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And what is very, very important is how to work with the interlinks between those two directives. Because historic houses will forever remember how and remind us how we dealt with the climate crisis. I believe, as I said, that we must do the utmost to make historic buildings to contribute in the green transition. But I also do believe, and I will fight for that, that historic houses in principle should be exempted from the very strict requirements of the energy efficiency. And therefore, I'm playing a little bit at the moment on my table with how also to propose that we could earmark some funds for historic houses, maybe especially in the cities that face a lot of climate transition challenges that are very expensive, but also because we need the historic houses with the potential to play a role as a first mover in a historical perspective that can stand out and give hope and creative ideas on how to renovate the historic buildings everywhere in Europe. Also in the framework of the European New Bauhaus. New Bauhaus is not about building new, it's also how we renovate and restore our historical building legacy. Myself, I was born on a farm and lived in a house from 1801. Apart from 6 months in a brand new apartment, I have always lived in old houses and buildings. I'm now the owner of an apartment in Denmark in a property from around 1655, and we just recently finished a renovation project. So I know how difficult that it is, but I also know that it is possible if we really engage and listen to experts, listen to best practices, and therefore and thereby really build the bridge between our needs for being more energy efficient, but also in a way where we uplift our historical buildings into the future. I'm glad to be able to be with you all today, and I'm also very happy to see that one of my fellow Danes is in the panel, because yesterday was announced a very interesting research report on historic buildings and renovation in terms of climate and energy efficiency. And that research report actually shows that it is the most climate-friendly way to deal with our built environment if we renovate and restore our historic buildings. And the research report is actually based on life cycle analysis assessments. And that is very valuable also for how we can hopefully during the next hour together come up with some of the very concrete ideas and needs for the revision of both the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Directive on Energy Performance of the Buildings Directive. So thank you for giving me the word. I'm really, really looking forward to hear and learn from all experts. And I also really hope that everyone who comes up with an idea on reflection, put it in the chat. Or if it grows with you after the session, then please do send us an email. The work right now in Brussels is on the heat. So we need the input now to make the regulation and directive work in a couple of years when it is hopefully and very strongly adopted by the European institutions. So happy to be with you, and I give now the floor back to you, Alfonso, and thank you so much for your very kind welcoming of me, and thanks to your team for organizing this event too.
I repeat, I'm Alfonso Pallavicini. I'm the president of European Historic Houses. I'm European. I'm such a mixture that I can't tell you which nationality I am. Today, I would like to first present you European Historic Houses, and then our views on the Green Deal and why we support it, but where we need to watch out. So if we can turn to the next slide, you will see what European Historic Houses is. We are the umbrella organization for 24 national associations of private historic houses all over Europe. We have more than 55,000 historic buildings in our association, but it's much larger than that because we represent people who have more than one house or so on. What we know is that roughly 40% of historic houses are in private hands in Europe, that they are, as Pernille said, a major attraction to tourists and bring a big economic activities with them. Historic houses, as you see this picture, have a huge visibility because of their beauty and historical value. But bear in mind that we are only talking about a very small part of the European building stock, probably a few percentage. But we have no figures as there is no overall mapping for Europe. Now, if you benchmark the emissions of historic houses versus the total emissions of Europe, and Anders will give us more detail in Denmark, we are probably talking about an extremely negligible figure. So historic houses in Europe, CO2 emission, very, very, very small. But what a value you get for it, as they correspond to the image of what tourists look for when they come to our countries in Europe, and which is then often the economical driver in lost parts of our rural Europe. The best example is that you can find whole European historical city centers rebuilt in Asia or in the Americas. The world envies our historical houses, and we risk destroying them. Most of Europe's historic houses have been built before the world discovered steel and concrete, major producers of CO2. They were built with locally sourced stones and wood, and they were built to last hundreds of years because they were built to be inherited from one generation to the next. They were not built like today to be destroyed after 40 years. So for me, they are the example of sustainable construction. And this does not seem to be taken into consideration in today's EPPD drafts. We agree that historic houses should also optimize energy performance, and they will do it because the owners will still need to attract people to rent them. But they will only be capable of doing what is feasible for a house which cannot be insulated from the outside, or which cannot put solar panels on the roof, etc., etc. You cannot make a person which is 80 run as a person which is 20. If we force rules on historic houses which are not officially protected, and there are many, we risk destroying a part of our common cultural built heritage. And not only, we will reduce housing capacity in Europe and for a range of our population which is socially fragile. Our issue today is the current definition of a historic house versus an officially protected house. Now, for the less technical, that's the technical definition in the EPPD for the exception. And we have the problem today because there is no structured mapping of historic houses in Europe. For us, European historic houses, a historic house is a house which is worthy of preservation in one form or another. It is much wider than the listed houses definition. It is much wider than the current houses which are registered as worthy of preservation. Think about some 300-year-old country house in France or the thousands of half-timbered houses all over Northern Europe. Many of them are today in no official registers, and it will take many years to do so, but we need to do it. The charm of Europe is that it is diverse, and so are the current protection laws. Every country has its standards, but one thing is unluckily in common in Europe, is that financial subvention schemes do not balance extra costs and complexity, and so owners do not want to list or register their houses. This is important because we estimate that almost half of the historic houses, we said 40%, in Europe are privately owned. The most important and visible ones are also open to the public and attract tourists in lost areas of rural Europe. In any case, the state has a good deal today because the state has no cost of management, no cost of renovation, and for many houses, they even receive tax revenues directly or indirectly through the tourism attracted. So we should be applauded. But beware, because the situation is critical today. As many of you know, many private owners put in their time, money, and passion to bring their houses to the next generation. The costs of keeping them are so high, even without the new energy performance rules, that more and more owners give up the fight. Now, if you forbid as well that those houses will be sold, what will happen? They will be left to silent destruction. And unluckily, we see it more and more in rural Europe. So my message to the European legislator today is simple. Thank you for having kept the exception for officially protected houses in the EPPD recast, but the number of historic houses are a multiple of what is today officially protected, and the timing too short to map them all. So please, please be pragmatic and do not create a Europe with no face anymore. I just have an example. Old-timer cars. Many of us love them. I live in Belgium. A car which is 25 years old is an old-timer car. It doesn't need to respect all the rules. They're still in the streets, people enjoy them, and the rule is extremely easy. It's just a date. If I take another example, the UK, which unluckily has left us, the rule is the same. It's buildings before 1920 are historic, and they need, on the other hand, then to do a series of minimal financial investments every year to be kept like they are, respecting, nevertheless, the energy performance rules. It's very easy, and all the owners agree that it's a very good solution. So thank you very much. And I'm very happy because I was shorter, so we will have more time for Q&A.
Yes, let me just introduce myself. An independent consultant working in this case for, yes, Historiske Huse, which is sort of a small Danish version of European Historic Houses, and one of the members of European Historic Houses. This little presentation simply uses Denmark as an example, and obviously, as Alfonso said, legislation is different from country to country and so on. So our conclusions here cannot be drawn directly to other countries, but nonetheless gave a sort of hint to where we're going. If we could take the next slide, please. Of approximately or a little more than 2 million heated buildings in Denmark, we have 5,300 that are properly listed. That means protected at a national level. And then we have another, at the moment, 120,000 houses that are registered as what we call worthy of protection in Denmark, that are actually registered, meaning somebody has been there and given these houses points on a 1 to 9 scale, where 9 is worst and 1 is the best from a sort of cultural point of view. The 120,000 come from a little less than half the local councils. It's basically the job of the local council to do this, to perform this registration. And a little less than half of all local councils in Denmark have made that registration. It is time consuming. And it is estimated officially by the Danish Agency for Culture and Palaces that another 230,000 or so buildings worthy of protection are not yet registered. That is obviously nothing but a guesstimate, so that figure may be doubtful. But for lack of better data, that's the one we use here. If you could take the next slide, please. Out of all Danish emissions, carbon or carbon equivalent emissions, heating of existing buildings or cooling, particularly of modern buildings, are responsible for about 17% of the total. The building industry as such, which includes new buildings, new roads, everything, stands for about 30%, of which roughly 2/3 relate to the existing building stock. And of that, again, a little share, about 1/6, goes to consumption that is controlled by the user, for cooking, heating, computers, and so on, that do not really have anything to do with the emissions of the housing as for heating or cooling. Of these, the listed ones, 5,300, are, as you can see, very, very, very small part. And the registered 120,000 account then for about 1.1% of all Danish emissions, and the unregistered, assuming the 230,000 is a correct number, another 2.1% or so. I should say that in these figures, I assume that historic buildings emit 20% more than the average building stock, simply because they are less well insulated and so on. That is obviously an assumption. Can be 25, could be 15. Nobody really knows. But just to be fair to the statistics, so listed buildings, I mean, 0.05% of all emissions. That is well within the statistical margin of error. So basically, they're not the buildings I want to talk about here. The really protected, the fine buildings, so to speak. They account for so little that their contribution to total emissions, at least in Denmark, is absolutely negligible. Next slide, please. And another issue is that most people recognize that fine royal palaces or a manor house like this one, or in general listed buildings being tourist attractions and so on, their cultural value is acknowledged. I mean, nobody really discusses that they should be kept. So exempting the proper listed buildings, at least as defined in Denmark, on the ones that are protected at a national level, that's basically uncontroversial. I'm more concerned, if you could take the next slide, I'm more concerned with the sort of second tier buildings, the one we call worthy of protection in Denmark. Stop, easy. Yeah, these second tier buildings in Denmark, we call them worthy of protection. In the UK, they call them grade 2 listed, and there are probably different definitions all over the world. They are characterized often by being quite simple, small houses, but houses that to a great extent actually shape our cities and our landscapes. They're not fine, iconic buildings in themselves, but they contribute a bit like a good bread to a meal. They sort of contribute to the general feeling of, for want of a better word, collective memory. They sort of shape. They shape our cultural understanding in a very visible way. I mean, you don't have to go to a museum to see these houses. They're there when you drive up to the grocery shop. These houses can be valuable in their own right, as this little half-timbered 19th century house shows. It's a fine example of a local building tradition in a part of Denmark. Or they can, as the next slide will show, simply be part of a larger setting, a village street where most of the houses are quite simple. None of them may be listed, but still worthy of protection in the sense that they shape the street on its own. Which, as here, I mean, none of these houses are listed, but nonetheless, that street reflects a long cultural history that most people tend to take for granted, but which, given the current proposal, may not be as safe as we hope. If you could take the next slide, these buildings are very, very simple. Typically, this is a fine little village house from the early 1900s, built probably as a pensioners' retreat for a farm sitting on the other side of the street. Then it got sold off at some stage, but it's built in this is sort of archetypal Danish building tradition, really. Red brick building, which we've used since medieval times. Windows made out of wood, very, very simple structure. That, as I said, was then sold off, and you can see the result on the next slide. Yes, it is actually the same house, before and after an intervention that is, I need to be honest, probably was only partially due to energy conservation measures. But while changing the roof, they raised it in order to put more insulation on it and so on. To sound a little bit tough from a cultural point of view, it would at this stage probably have been more merciful simply to pull the house down. If you take the next slide. This is a real problem, and particularly in a that's not true, a cold or semi-cold, humid climate as a Danish one, there is simply a limit as to how much interior insulation you can put in a house for simple technical reasons. We have issues of moisture that would then generate rot and irrevocably damage the structure if we're not careful. So, from a purely Danish point of view, a general requirement that all buildings should be upgraded to energy class E or better can, in practice, in most cases, there will obviously be exceptions, but in most cases can only be done by applying exterior insulation, as you see on this picture. Now, what happens here is that the builder, obviously, or this is my guess, but it looks like that the builder applied his collective memory and stopped before putting mineral wool on top of this, around this fine neoclassical lintel, to ask the engineer, did he really mean it seriously? Which is a good reaction on the builder's part, because, I mean, a little bit flippantly, if I did this to a human being, I would go straight to prison for aggravated assault. So again, if we do this, the buildings lose their cultural value. It's as simple as that. And that's sort of the political consequence of policies that don't allow for exemptions. Take the next slide. Now, historical houses in Denmark, or historic buildings in Denmark, can and definitely should contribute. I mean, 3.3% of total Danish emissions doesn't sound like much, but we all know that there's no catch-all. If we really need to dramatically reduce emissions in Europe, it will be done in bits and pieces of 0.5% here, another percent there. So obviously, yes, historic buildings need to contribute to this as well, within their ability. That's really the argument here. Yes, they can easily reach the same energy standards as modern buildings. Then they're just not historic buildings anymore. I mean, simple steps could be taken, starting by looking at the energy source. Actually, the share of historic buildings, in this case defined as buildings before 1940, that are heated by oil burners or gas or petroleum, is almost double that of the average. So there's one easy way to start. You can apply extra insulating windows, as in this case, which is actually it's basically an old Russian invention from the 17th century, but has been in existence in Denmark since the late 1800s. Definitely not used everywhere because they tend to be expensive, and people until the 1970s didn't really care. But that's one way of doing it, as you see in this picture. Adding obviously that bit of insulation that you can do without compromising sort of the long-term health of the building. All that can be done, but we cannot guarantee an energy level, energy efficiency grading E or better in all cases. Actually, in most cases, we will not be able to guarantee that. That has a lot to do with the energy source, but we can do a lot with our historic buildings, and actually quite a lot is being done as we speak, because as Alfonso rightly said, I mean, most owners actually have an incentive to do it, simply to reduce their energy bill.
2 minutes, please.
I'll just finish by showing you just a couple of pictures of these second-tier buildings from a 1890s villa on the outskirts, and modern outskirts as it was at the time, of a small provincial town. Such a building will lose all claim to fame, so to speak, if it were to be insulated on the exterior. The half timber would disappear, the windows would move into very deep recesses, which goes counter to Danish building tradition. So our main request really is that as long as there are buildings that are not registered anywhere, we should really be careful. So yes, all historic buildings should be officially registered, and in the meantime, please don't overdo, so to speak, because we cannot get them back. And my final slide shows a simple, small village house, which is more an example. It's not architecture in that sense. It's a representative of a historic tradition, again, collective memory, fine little neoclassical detail that the bricklayer who made it 150 years ago, he probably didn't even know why he made it, but he made it because his father had made it, and hence the tradition. And then somebody modernizes the place around 1920 and installs a simple and downscaled Art Nouveau garden gate, which is really, I think this picture sort of epitomizes what we're talking about, namely this collective memory, this glue that holds all the fine buildings together, and again the glue that holds us together as sort of cultural entities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anders. It was extremely clear and very professional. I think we all understand what it's about. You're an architect, and you can talk technical language as well. Next on the floor will be Vlastislav Ouroda, who is the Vice Minister of Culture for the area of cultural heritage in the Czech Republic. We thank him very much to take his time to talk to us, because he will give us the view of a national cultural regulator for historic houses. Vlastislav, the floor is yours.
Many thanks. Good morning, Mr. President, distinguished members of European Parliament, dear colleagues and friends of our cultural heritage. First of all, I would like to thank you for this outstanding opportunity to send a brief message from our everyday practice in cultural heritage management. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you very much. Our country has 40,000 of listed buildings and over 600 of protected historic sites or urban structures. We have relatively strong tools for their protection. A vast majority of endangered monuments has been saved during last 30 years. However, in every single Czech or Moravian, Silesian town or village, we can find some valuable buildings and spaces non-protected under the law of conservation. In most of such cases, the local identity is firmly connected with this local architecture. Of course, there are many ways how to meet and even improve the level of energy performance standards here, but it cannot be reached under the rules for new buildings without a risk of inevitable cultural losses. Next slide, please. I consider the exceptional approach to buildings of a special heritage or architectural value to be an extremely important topic. Let me assure you that we, cultural heritage professionals, are ready to contribute to the Green Deal for the world as we can achieve. Yet without this exception, we will not be able to manage the future for our monuments as unique sources of our cultural identity and diversity. Right now, the European Parliament has in its hands not only results of the effort of generations of architects, donors, and conservationists, but above all, a very fragile fabric of tangible heritage. We are aware of the fact that it's necessary to limit the exemption. With all due respect, let me please propose a potential way how the adequate types of buildings worth the exception may be specified. I do believe we can find some criteria in one of our most important tools, namely the Convention for the Protection of the Architectural Heritage of Europe. Another, more simple yet very efficient way has been proposed by Mr. Pallavicini. The criterion of the value of the age, if I understood well, the Alterswert. I know for certain that there is a lot of argumentation available for the special situation of monuments in the green transition as a really fated topic of our present and future. I'm looking forward to hearing the speech of the representative of ICOMOS, my colleague Franziska Haas. That's why I decided to be very brief. Let me please express cordial thanks to the member of the European Parliament, Pernille Weiss, and European Historic Houses for organizing this meeting, and to all of you for taking part in it. Furthermore, I would like to declare my high appreciation to the role of private owners in the care of European tangible cultural heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention.
Dear Vice Minister, you are so kind, and it's a pleasure to hear your words.
My pleasure.
Think we have a real partner in the Czech Republic, and thank you very much. So last, I will give the word to Franziska Haas, who is the president of the International Scientific Committee on Energy Sustainability inside ICOMOS. I don't need to explain ICOMOS. Please, Franziska, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Alfonso. Can you hear me?
Yes, and let's try to stick to 10 minutes so that we have a Q&A afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks that I got the opportunity to present here my views on as a researcher that is dealing with heritage conservation on the one side and energy efficiency on the other side. And I thought, since I have 10 minutes, I would like to give you like 10 statements which highlight the crucial aspects from my point of view of the directive of the new directive in relation to the preservation of the historic built heritage. First one, Our built heritage is at risk from climate change. To achieve the climate targets from the Paris Agreement could be our last chance to preserve it. So the consequences of the climate change also pose considerable risk for the historical building stock. So through extreme weather events, storms, heavy rains, floods, wildfires, we all know that problems. The structural destruction of cultural heritage is a visible effect of the climate change. And the building sector as a whole is responsible for a large share of harmful factors, like 33% of the waste production, 31% of the CO2 emissions. Therefore, a deep change of the construction sector is urgently needed, also regarding the protection of cultural heritage. Second one, historic buildings matter. Without them, a climate neutral building stock will not be possible. Therefore, they deserve our special attention. I'm not only talking in line with my previous speakers about the few outstanding monuments, but about all the building stock with architectural and historical merit. This stock is difficult to express in numbers. Earlier, we saw some figures from Denmark. For Germany, the latest report on Baukultur states that 5 to 7% of all buildings are listed, but that 30% of the building stock is located in historic city centers and worthy of preservation. Here you can see a graph with the building stock built before 1945 in Europe, created by my colleague Alexandra Troy already in 2011, based on statistical data. You see that 14% of the EU building stock dates before 1919, other 12% before 1945, with considerable national differences, corresponding to 30, respective 55 million dwellings and 120 million Europeans living there. It is estimated that refurbishment can save 180 million tons CO2 within 2050. So additionally to this historic building stock built before 1945, we have also post-war architecture housing districts with enormous cultural and historical and architectural value. So we cannot completely exempt this building stock from the regulations, nor can we apply conventional efficiency standards to them. The standardization in the renovation sector promoted by the renovation wave strategy also poses a risk to the diversity of the existing building stock beyond the building listed as monuments. Aspects of preservation, protection needs, and compatibility must be included in the EU strategies. We need ideas, good solutions, and a new culture in dealing with our architectural heritage. Third one, the preservation of cultural and social values is also an active contribution to climate protection. Europe's rich and large building stock offers us familiar living environments and make development tangible. We saw it already in the talks before. These buildings have the potential to convince people of the needs for climate action. Change, we can learn from living in that buildings and dealing with the buildings, what it means to turn toward sufficiency away from efficiency. That should be also reflected in the EPPD, and I don't see it yet. A variety of opportunities for mobilizing cultural heritage in the European Green Deal and linking it to the renovation wave are outlined in the European Heritage Green Paper, published by Europa Nostra, ECOMOS, and the European Investment Bank. This can be understood as a handbook for politics, how to capitalize the potential with aspects ranging from citizens' engagement to the extended use of environmental product declaration. So also this is a need called out from the heritage community, and we are asking for the fourth one. Thank you. Exemptions from the minimum standards must be possible for protected monuments. The decision must be with the member states due to the different regulations of this designation process. and Alfonso already spoke about that. The member states must continue to be given the opportunity to exempt protected monuments and from binding requirements, or to allow for more flexible approaches in the EPPD. Officially, protection is very complex in Europe and differs from country to country. But, and I would also like to emphasize this here, member states should be urged to proactively help owners of officially protected buildings to do whatever is possible to apply impacting sustainable measures. Heritage protection is a task for the whole society and not only for the building owners. The support can look quite differently. For instance, in Germany, we have consultants for energy efficiency in historic buildings, energy consultants. This German model could be also applied to other countries, and it is not asked for in the new EPPD. There is asked for experts, not specialized experts. Fifth, we need value-based strategies for existing buildings with architectural and historical values in its entire complexity, which not only considering energy efficiency. So looking beyond the outstanding monuments and on the entire building stock with architectural value, it is an essential requirement, however, that the states define appropriate quality standards in order to achieve the historical building stock worth preserving is renovated as energy and resource efficiently as possible in the individual building situation, taking into account the aspects of heritage, compatibility, and sustainability. So I don't speak against minimum standards applied to historic buildings, but I ask for quality standards for these buildings, not only regarding energy efficiency and energy performance of the buildings. So rules and certificates were made for new houses up to now, but this should be adapted to the characteristic of these historic structures and traditional buildings. We have to understand the variety of the shapes, the geographies and the ownership of structures of these houses, and cannot only apply or cannot only characterize them according to their age. Because if you look at the buildings before 1945, this is really a diverse building stock. And I think it is wrong in the EPPD recast in the draft as we have it now, that it is left up to member states to define certain requirements for new and existing buildings differently. I think that should be a strong requirement to make a difference between new and existing building stock. And looking on the valuable buildings, on the heritage buildings, we have already standards that can help to define here these quality requirements. There is the EN 16883 for the energy efficiency renovation of historic buildings. There's the Davos Declaration of Baukultur, very important, and already mentioned in the chat, there are the quality standards from ICOMOS that we can use for the definition 6. Historic buildings are resources not only in terms of energy, there's an increasing use of LCAs to demonstrate the environmental impact of their conservation and restoration. Historic buildings represent an enormous resource, not only in terms of energy stored in them. They are best practice examples of adaptation to ever-changing use requirements and transformations to which they have been subjected in the course of their existence. They also offer knowledge and insight into the use of local building materials and durable structural solutions. Natural and locally available materials resources were preferably used in the construction of historic buildings, In addition, historic buildings look back on a long lifetime and will also be preserved for a long time in the future. Accordingly, continuous conservation measures, maintenance plans and repair must also be supported. Reuse existing buildings is one of the most effective ways to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. The demand for life cycle considerations in the retrofitting and renovation of buildings and neighborhoods is very much in line with the historical and particularly worthy of preservation building fabric. Therefore, it is not enough if in the EPPD directive is stated that first steps are taken to address carbon emission over the whole life cycle of a building, because this we plan to do life cycle assessment only for 5% for the new constructions, and if all the other constructions beside. Next one. LCA studies show refurbishment, including refurbishments in accordance with the preservation requirements, is better than demolishing a building and build a new one. Doing nothing, however, is usually the worst option from an environmental point of view. It is not true that we don't have LCA studies, and Pernille Weiss mentioned it in the beginning also with the report. They are a growing number where we can take really knowledge from, and they come up more or less all with the same results. We have to find common ways to perform this LCA analysis, and we have to get a way how to measure the greenhouse gas emission that is avoided through the use and the adaptive reuse of existing buildings, with also recognizing the co-benefits associated with conserving heritage values in the built environment. Next one. Building can only be preserved if they are used. Best practice case studies show that also for historic buildings, appropriate improvement can be achieved by respecting the cultural values. And instead, showing here these worst examples, as we already saw in the beginning, I want to show here a database where we collected best practices examples. And we show a lot of win-win solutions. These win-win solutions you can only perform if the renovation is user needs driven. And in this Hyper Atlas, you find a lot of buildings that can save a considerable number of energy and CO2 emission. And I think we should take these best practices. And we should not, if it comes to renovation, we should not stop thinking too early. We should not avoid any energy measure from the beginning. We should just find a good win-win solution, as I said, and there are. Then next one. It is not a matter of renovating a single building to zero energy standard, but of achieving a CO2 neutral building stock. The proposal for a recast EPPD sets the vision for achieving a zero emission building stock by 2050 and to reflect a new complementary carbon metric to orient choices towards carbonized solutions. So we should not only focus on single buildings. There are many reasons to promote neighborhood solutions. The energy networking of individual buildings in the neighborhood allows the maximum use of locally available renewable energies, even while maintaining the requirements of historic preservation, which leads to a climate neutral building stock. And this, we have to keep track of the renovation pathways on the one side, but maybe we can also include in the EPPD some possibility to set targets for whole districts. I think there's a big chance to bring together all the needs we have for avoiding CO2 emission, but also preserving cultural and social values of the districts. The last one, smart financing model that promotes both energy efficiency and the preservation of cultural heritage have positive impact on local economic development. Every building has to be looked at carefully, so that the money invested is that we do with the money invested the right things. And we have to shift the focus from this financial return only to blended financial and social returns. That includes a lot more of just calculating the energy efficiency afterwards. Because this can also support local economy. Just one example, no, it's the 10th, you can go one forward. Just one example, we calculated the replacement of a window, or the refurbishment of a window for South Tyrol. And the one scenario was to refurbish it, to repair it, and to put a new glass inside, energy saving glass. And the other scenario was to buy a new one made from plastic. And it gave, in the end, it was more or less the same energy we save. It was more or less the same money we spend. But in the one case, we spend the money for local craftsmen, we spend the money for local material, and the other case, not. So where the money is invested best, I think in the first case. So just this small example makes it possible to think about this combined effects of funding models. And to close that one, as Pernille said and called out, we need the experts, and in the amendments to the EPPD adopted in 2018, there was already a statement looking for research into and the testing of new solutions for improving the energy performance of historic buildings and sites should be encouraged, while also safeguarding and preserving cultural heritage. I missed that part in the new recast. So heritage community is ready to contribute, I think, and this includes all heritage authorities that giving out guidelines for energy efficiency in historic buildings. There are applied research as the URAC Research Institute where I work. There are universities that are teaching students, and we have to build up on that knowledge and have to form this think tank because it's really an important task to bring it forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Franziska. It was very clear, very technical. So thank you, Franziska. I give the floor now to Mr. Pau Garcia Audí, who is policy officer in the DG NRB3, so the Commission, the EU Commission, and who's working with the EPPD and will give us the views of the Commission.
Very much, Alfonso, and thank you very much to the overall organization of the event, and to Pernille Weiss also for inviting us to be here today and explain a little bit what we see about historical buildings. So first of all, just to state that we fully recognize the importance of historical buildings, and we are not talking just about the very highly protected, the cathedrals, the palaces, the ones that everybody thinks about when we talk about historical buildings, but we also recognize the importance of all the buildings that actually make the character of our cities and our villages. That is absolutely the case. Unfortunately, we live in Brussels, and we are all a bit too familiar with the term of Brusselization and the damage that it can do. So yes, we are aware of it. At the same time, we also see that there is a lot that can be done even to historical buildings or to buildings, excuse me, that are partially protected, or that are a neighborhood, for example, that has aesthetic protection. There's still things that can be done internally to the building, systems, controls, connecting to a decarbonized district heating and cooling system. So there is, even though they are protected, and we need to make sure that they remain protected, there is still things that can be done. So we need to potentiate that aspect. So overall, we try to approach the issue of historical buildings from several aspects. The first one is, of course, the directive. There, currently on the recast of the EPPD in 2010 and then amended in 2018, there is a recognition for the need to exempt historical buildings. The proposed revisions, I believe, goes even further than that, because it's not just a pure exemption. It also allows member states to adapt the requirements to these buildings. So these, for example, would allow the case of recognizing that maybe you just can't do something only to the facade of the building, but you can do other things to the building. So this allows member states even more flexibility. It's just not an on-off, you're protected, you're not protected. It gives them more scope to provide further measures. On the minimum energy performance standards, of course, the EPPD introduces an exemption of this because we recognize it may just not be feasible to achieve that grade, especially for the more protected buildings. These extend to the zero energy building. We know, excuse me, we know that some buildings just can't achieve that level, particularly existing ones, and not just historical buildings, also existing buildings. So there are alternatives there where people can connect to an energy community, for example, or to a decarbonized district heating systems, and even to the general grid, particularly in those member states that have very high levels of renewable energy in their mixes. With all of these, the EPPD has to provide a lot of flexibility to member states because we need to allow for the differences in what is considered historical and the differences levels of protections that member states provide. What is considered historical in one member state may not be considered historical in other member states, or vice versa, even though we do share some elements. So this is an area where we thought the best was to give as much flexibility as possible. One comment on the life cycle assessment. Yes, for now we address mainly new buildings. We do these because we recognize that first we need to start gathering data. We need to start developing and test the methodology for assessing the life cycle carbon. But we also acknowledge the fact that the renovation is far less intensive in terms of embedded emissions. We are already working on an existing structure. The emissions were already embedded in this building 50, 100 years ago. So we need to make the most out of this. So we don't put as much pressure on this element at the moment. And I've talked about the legislations. I would like also to add that in addition to the legislation, there are a number of support measures. So, for example, under the different programs, such as Horizon Europe or LIFE, these programs can support work on historic and heritage buildings. These can cover things, for example, like research for new technological solutions or adaptation of existing solutions to historical buildings. But we also, for example, support the training of craftsmen and architects and engineers, because we all need to learn how to deal with such buildings. It's a bit of a specialized area. So we need to learn exactly how to deal with it, and perhaps even more important, these kind of programs can also support the exchange of best practice and the communication between the different practices, because we need to learn from one another. This is an area where one member state can have a lot of experience working in certain types of buildings, and another one can have other experiences. Or they share very similar buildings. I could imagine, for example, that Italy and Spain share a lot of similarities in their historical buildings, so that there is a good scope for learning from one another. And I think that's it. That's it for me. I hope I kept it to the time.
Thank you, Pau. It's perfect. Thank you to be that open. I think we will have more technical, more in-depth discussions in the next few weeks. I think we all work into the same direction, is to save the image of Europe and our heritage. So now, if Professor Kampmann is there, I would like him to explain us in 2 minutes this unbelievable study we heard about yesterday, because I think it says it all. Professor Kampmann.
It's well, we just finished a research project on a small house in Denmark, a half-timbered house out in the country, and we made different restoration scenarios to see to insulate somewhat more and nearly nothing. You can see I gave you a link so you can have a look, all of you. And it's described how we insulate the different parts of the house, and then we also compare it with if you want to make some new houses, brick house or timber house, and if it's 2 minutes, it's not very long, but if you see to the right, you would see the climate change impact for the different scenarios and for the new houses. So actually, the climate impact is bigger for the new houses, even though it's a brand new sustainable house, the timber house, than for the old house, if it has some insulation put inside. Maybe I should, this scenario 1, say what it would be. It would be 200 millimeter of wood fiber on the roof. On the floor, it would be insulated too, and then on the inside of the walls, it would be 75 millimeter of hempcrete, and the windows would be provided with a secondary layer of energy glass. But all the existing windows and doors, they are kept. And then I think what is very important too is that I should see if I can. Yeah, because house lifetime, actually we calculated all this for a lifetime of 50 years. And when we're talking, we've seen all the nice pictures of the houses today. And when you're speaking about 50 years lifetime of a house, for people like us, it seems rather ridiculous. So we have also counted for 100 years lifetime. So actually, if you look at the small house it's at Bornholm, this is if you do nothing at all, scenario 1, no extra glass behind the windows, no insulation at all. But actually, you can see if you compare it with to build new houses, and the new houses can only last for 50 years. We don't know, but actually we should turn it around, that it's not us who likes the old building, we shouldn't excuse for the old buildings. Actually, it's architects and engineers who should learn a lot from the old houses, because it's so important that you can repair the house and you can build a house which is nice to look at and it's nice to live in for many years.
Thank you very much. I think it's self-explaining. I asked you yesterday, I don't know if you have the answer by now, if in the scenario 1, what is the energy performance index of the house?
We didn't calculate that. I've just sent to Birte Juhl. I've sent you what would the kilowatt hour per square meter be for the different scenarios, for the 4 different scenarios, but we didn't put it into boxes to give them the label.
Okay, but thank you very much. Very interesting. We will put as well the link on our homepage so that everyone can find it.
Alfonso, I'm a surprise guest in this round. Thank you for giving me the floor. I was not expecting it, but yes, I commented in the chat because I think there are a couple of elements. As Pernille rightly mentioned, there are several directives out there now that will have an impact on our building stock, including the Energy Performance of Building Directive and the Energy Efficiency one. But I wouldn't forget as well the Renewable Energy Directive, but also as provision to mainstream in renewable in buildings. Regarding the EPPD, the one who is now up for discussion today, I think we all agree that the most impactful measure of the provision of this directive will be this mandatory minimum energy performance requirements. And I was questioning in the chat how this is can be compatible, and I think it's what's widely explained already with this individual building approach. We understand the objective of a measure, but we always say we need flexibility. We need more flexibility at national level to set the stock targeted, to set the timeline according to what is feasible or not feasible by each member state. Paul mentioned that there is some flexibility. In our view, there is not enough. And regarding the timeline in particular, I think something that is really relevant for historical houses is the lack of craftsmen. We have a general lack of construction workers in Europe. And the big question is how are we going to manage to renovate this entire building stock? We did all calculations, it's about 35 million buildings in Europe by 2033. And especially for historical building, you need craftsmen with special skills, not only energy efficiency skills, but also the skill to be able to renovate in a traditional way. I like very much Franziska approach. Objective 9, she mentioned this carbon neutral stock approach might be problematic. We need to move towards a district approach. This is something that we have been pushing for years. And if I read the spirit of a directive, I think this is not the direction we are going, because the idea under these MEPs, but under the new EPPD, is to move from G to A buildings, so to zero emission buildings. And there is a very strict definition of what zero emission building will be. And I just wanted to say one more about value. Everyone thinks historical buildings, not only the listed one, but all buildings with a historical or aesthetical value are worth millions of euros. What we forget is many of these buildings are actually worth nothing. And when it comes to renovating them, you need to invest more than you would usually do in a normal, let's say, more recent building. And the value of your building will still quite low. And this is the case in many, if I take the example, for example, of a Irish village or Italian village, where they even give these houses for €1. So if you have to invest 50,000 euro into a building that is worth 100,000, it's not the same thing as if you invest the same amount into a building or a castle which is worth 1 or 2 million euro. So that's always a financial aspect to the discussion. And when we talk about all these buildings, if we really want to renovate them in a traditional let's say traditional way, then you need to invest more money, and it's all about that as well. In the end, everything is feasible. The question is how much you're able to invest. Thank you, Alfonso, for giving me the floor.
I think there is another post which is interesting, and you can find the link in the post. There was a huge study done by Europa Nostra with ICOMOS, and Franziska referred to it, on the European Cultural Heritage Green Paper, who refers as well to the necessity to have a wide exception for historic houses. And again, thank you to them. And if people are interested, please just you find the link in the in our chat. Otherwise, is there Delphine?
Hello, Alfonso. Thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you to everyone who organized this really interesting meeting, I have to say. Delphine Dupuy, I'm representing the European Landowner Organization. I'm really close also to the European Historical Houses, and we are like relatives, because landowners, you know, they possess also historic buildings mostly, and also agricultural buildings, which are also part of the directive. That's why I wanted to take the floor. I can only support what was said already, the specificity, the value of our historic buildings in Europe. I'm sorry if I go into the detail of the EPPD directive and if I'm a bit too technical, but I wanted to point out also the importance of the different articles in this directive, and mostly the one related to EPC. And I think it's something we didn't talk about, but the EPC doesn't differentiate between buildings. So the Article 17 will impact also historic building in general. So this is something we should maybe reflect upon. Is there a value for an historic building, especially with regarding its specificity on the market? Is there a real value that when it's sold or rented, we provide for an EPC, especially when it's related to big buildings, building that if they organize with EPC would be very costly. And also I've seen a lot discussion in the chat about skilled workers and craftsmen. I think it's a really, really important aspect. Do we have the capacity? Do we have the capacity in Europe to engage with a large energy renovation of our building stock? This is a question I want to ask, and mostly for politicians. Please try to organize the legislation in order that it's really concrete and that it's in reality feasible on the side. So of course we all want to play our role. I think historical building, agricultural building in rural areas, they have all interest to be efficiency renovate, to lower the price. But in another aspect, please, when you write the article legally, please consider the consequences, because sometimes we don't take into consideration how it would be interpreted in front of the courts, how it would be interpreted by local authorities, that sometimes they don't have the skill also to interpret. You know, they maybe have no specific competence on historic aspect. They maybe not have competencies on all those architectural values. So please make sure that when it comes to the flexibility, you give also the means to make it adapted at the local level. And this is why also I'm pledging for the Article 15 also to have a specific fund for historic building, because this is what was said. We need a funding adapted to this sector. So please make sure that in this article, this is really reflected. Thank you very much for your really interesting debate, and for MEP Weiss for being supportive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delphine. We have a raised hand from Poland, I think, seeing the name.
Hello, I have a question about the manors castles policies, because we have houses on the villages. We have green energy everywhere. So that is why my question, how many of private owners have right now green technology in their palaces, castles, manors, and how law can help private owners to protect houses, making renovation, but also focus on the green energy. On the village, we don't have a problem with this. We have wind, we have sun, we have everything. We have trees, I have forest. So that is why for me, it's not important to have coal, for example. I don't have a problem with energy because I have this everywhere. I can also have energy from the water because I have river also. That is why I think that sometimes it's not a problem with find good solutions, find somewhere natural energy, green energy, but it's problem in law. Private owners here in Poland have this problem that they are not developers, they are not investors. They don't have a hotels, for example, like me. We have houses, typical houses where we work and we also live. So that is why we don't have the same rights like investors, like developers. If they, for example, making hotels, they don't have a lot of problems because they put money to the local, I don't know, economy. So that is why I think that we need more protection for private owners. And I think that the green energy is very important, and also solutions, how we can also make this in the big buildings. We have a very big houses, so we need a lot of energy. Like, you know, we have here. I live close to the Baltic Sea. We have very cold winter on the north. That is why we need much more energy on the winter than, for example, people from the very warm countries. That is why I also will be grateful for information about the new solutions for us, for people like me, how we can use technology and what technology can help us already for our buildings.
Thank you very much for your comment. I'm not technical enough to be able to answer it, but we will try to find someone who can answer the question. But I think our issue today is the new directive or the new directives and the impact on historic houses. Green energy is certainly one part of the answer, but actually the energy performance index, the EPCs, will be key to see what we are allowed to do or not are allowed to do. So I cannot answer it. If someone else can answer, please, the floor is theirs. Otherwise, we are already almost at our time. I would propose to give 1 minute to each of the 3 people who have raised their hands, and then we need to stop the debate. Unlucky, we will try to reorganize something. Pernille, do you have an answer for it, or shall I go on?
No, in respect for the time, I think, yeah, your proposal to go on with 1 minute to each, and then we wrap up, and then hopefully we will have an event soon again to follow up on the many, many issues.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pernille. So, Eleni, from Greece, please. The floor is yours.
I need just a minute. What I want to propose is that there is a problem with, as you said, with the buildings that they are not officially listed. So my proposal is that we could propose legislation for all the buildings that are built before 1945.
That's in England. They took this road. It's before 1920. It's very easy. I agree with you.
Okay, because in Greece we have the modern movement between 1930 and 1940. That's why I think in Greece we could propose another date. Every state could propose something different. Thank you.
Very pragmatical proposal, and I would certainly agree to it. Thomas Schulze, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for your efforts here. I would like to comment that I fully agree that the problem with the new directive is that facades need to be covered, and this is clearly unacceptable. And beside that, it's technically more than questionable, even from an energetic point of view, not only for old houses. But anyhow, what I really would like to know is what, and connecting a bit to what my colleague in Poland said a couple of minutes ago, I think we need to contribute something as well. And there are methods. Unfortunately, most of the professionals, like the plumbers and so on, are not sufficiently trained to say, okay, you can do this and you can do that. You can do a lot. I did it. Yeah, therefore I know it. Yeah. And we changed a 17th century mansion in the northern Spain to nearly passive house level. Yeah. And it's still nice and beautiful, and without covering the facade, of course. So if there could be some help there, because then we would not be in the public only as the ones that put the brakes. Because everybody, oh yes, they own a big castle, and on top of that, they do not want to cooperate. I think we can cooperate, and it's in our own special interest, because you can save a lot of money in heating. And so, not talking about the facades. The facades, covering the facades, is an absolute no-go. Thanks, and greets to everybody.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's clear, but what I'm saying is we should do what's possible, but we can't be forced to do whatever is possible for other houses.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Word to Emmanuel, please. 1 minute and 1 minute to Franziska, and then we stop.
Thank you, Alfonso. Just quickly, because Pernille was asking about comments about on the EED more specifically, I have one very concrete one. There is this exemplary role of public building under Article 6 and this 3% requirement. And what we didn't take into consideration in this article is when you have mixed ownership between public and private owners, this can happen. And if you want a concrete example of what could be done, notably in relation to the discussion today, I think it would be to have a specific exemption for this type of building when you have a mixed ownership. So that's a very concrete one. And just one word for Pau, he say the reference to adapt instead of exemption now in the Article 5 of the EPPD give more flexibility to member states, is broader. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think it could be interpreted differently. So I'm just asking you, why didn't you keep exempted and adapted? It would have been at least more clear and we understand better what is feasible. I think our member state could transpose this more clearly. So thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel, because that's our demand as well. So Pau, do you want to answer?
No, thanks, Emmanuel. I take the point on the EED. I'm not dealing with the EED, but sorry, I'm just writing at the same time. But I will pass the message because I think that's a relevant point. On the EPPD, no, that's a fair comment. It's interesting. We do try to take into account how different things can be then discussed in the during the negotiations, and particularly then during transposition and implementation. From our side, the adaptation can include exemption. It just before it was kind of like a binary system where you could simply exempt and that's it. Now the idea is that member states can adapt. So, for example, minimum energy performance requirements could be exempt from the facade if it's a protected building, or if it's a building in a protected area, regardless of whether it's listed or not. So that could cover that area. So for us, adaptation covers both of them.
Okay. Thank you, Pau, because you will receive a demand from our side that we should be able to say exempt or adapt.
I take note. Thanks.
Okay. So, Franziska, bitte schön.
Yeah, so it was, by luck, was the last comment from Emmanuel, and the question now was also what I wanted to ask, but additionally to that, two short comments. First, if you said, Pau, again, that LCA for refurbishments is not possible, you're working on that and so on. I know it's a challenge, but why not to set also goals and targets in the EPPD? You do it also for other points where you say we have to do it until 2023, we have to introduce it. Why not working on that also to give timelines to us to really force ourselves to introduce this LCA analysis in the EPPD? And the other one is, I think regarding the craftsman, it's not, I would like to repeat, it's not important only to support good craftsmanship, but also to support this energy consultants specialized for historic buildings, because they can really accompany processes. They can go to buildings and say, yes, this is possible. Just don't stop thinking too early, but you can preserve cultural and architectural values while improving your energy demand and while improving your indoor comfort. That is also important. They have to have the experiences and they have to learn how to deal with historic buildings. I think they have really a key role. And yeah, I can invite you to look at the German system. I think it's not perfect yet, but it works quite well. So it can take as an example. Okay.
Thank you, Franziska. Dankeschön. Before I pass on the word to Pernille, who will do the conclusion. I have one more comment for Pernille on the EED, and it's on Article 6, because the exemplary role of public bodies building, and maybe I'm too perverted, but I might understand that if a public body rents from a private individual a house, they are obliged actually to make it then E or more standards. If it's not possible, they will say goodbye, it goes back to the private individual. I don't think this is what we want to do. So just one comment. Pernille, thank you very much for helping us. The floor is yours to give us the last word.
Thank you so much, Alfonso, and your team, and all the contributors, the panels, and the extra panelists, and all the questions and remarks in the chat. Very much thank you. On the Article 6, Alfonso, no, that couldn't actually be the intention. So we need to revise that details as well also. I'm very, very thrilled. I have a lot of notes on my paper to continue my work, but also I really hope that we can meet soon again, especially maybe taking on board what Franziska Haas was mentioning about the local benefits, the social benefits, but may I add as a nurse also the health-related benefits of how we restore, how we renovate our physical environment, our houses, our buildings. That could be very valuable. Also, then expanding from there to how to finance, how to make either a stage or a deep renovation project, because a lot of building owners, big and small, they need more guidance in how to really also process, facilitate, and process plan the renovation. So I think we should dig deeper into that and include the externalities, not only related to CO2 reductions, but also what values more is created. And I really much also like the idea of have value-based strategies to build in flexibility for the member states and for the local communities to do what works best for them, but also really work on having a common shared backbone of architectural value-based strategies for Europe to share with each other, because that also creates a common shared language and also a common shared urge to nurse our cultural heritage and historical buildings. So thank you so much, everybody. And I have tried now for the last 2 years a lot of online events, but the vibrance and the innovative energy in this event really reached the top of my experiences so far. So thank you so much, everybody. I look forward to cooperate in the future.
It is woman power, because
no, it's human. It's European human power. Thank you
very, very much, and we will reorganize something in a few months. Thank you to everyone. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye.